going back, we're on DAF Yud Zayin Amud Aleph. For those of you on Kosher Tube, you came in a little bit late to this one. So we are talking about in the times of the Greeks, when they took over the temple, what happened was that they violated the temple in a number of ways. And one of the things they did was they broke down 13 breaches in the walls of the temple. Why 13? Be an interesting analysis to discover why. And what happened was that when the Chashmonoim came and they recaptured the temple and they re-sanctified it, they repaired all of those 13 breaches, and that's why a person is supposed to bow down, to correspond to those 13 repaired breaches to commemorate the miracle. Now, the most rest of the Amud, we're going to be discussing a passage in Ezekiel chapter 47, which talks about a vision that the prophet has regarding water coming out of the temple and rejuvenating all of Eretz Yisrael, because the water basically comes out in a very tiny stream out of the Holy of Holies, emerges from that gate that we spoke about in our Mishnah, and from that water it begins to slowly expand until it becomes a raging river, spreading throughout all of Eretz Yisrael and emptying out into the various bodies of water that are already existent in Eretz Yisrael, rejuvenating those waters and making Eretz Yisrael become a lush forest of fruit and produce. And so basically, this passage is going to be analyzed. So let's take a look. So where are we? On that day, says the prophet, there will be living water emanating from Jerusalem. Tani mi beis kodesh kadashim ara paroches kekarne sili vikili. He said, the Brisa says that when it starts just to flow from the Holy of Holies, it'll be such a tiny stream of water that it'll be as narrow as the antenna of really tiny bugs. Min paroches ad mizbeach hazahav kekarne chagovim. By the time it gets from the paroches to the golden altar inside the heichal, then it'll expand just a little bit more to the size of the antenna of grasshoppers. Mimizbach hazahav ad azaros kechut shel shesi. From the golden altar until the courtyards, the outer courtyards, it'll be the size of a warp thread. And min ha'azaros ad miftan habayis kechut shel arev. And from the courtyards to the threshold, then by that time it'll have expanded to the thread of a woof, which is a little bit wider. Mikan va'elach kimipi hapach. And then from that point onwards, once it leaves the temple confines, the stream will expand to the size of a bottle cap. Okay, ksiv, and that's what the word mepachim means, that the water will expand to the size of a pach cover, a jug cover. Ksiv v'hinei mayim mepachim min hakosef hayemonis, that it says that the water will flow forth from the right flank. V'tzei sa'ish kadim, when the man shall go eastward. V'kav biyado, and a measuring stick in his hand. This is part of Yechezkel's vision. That the Yechezkel's vision is that there is an angel that is leading Yechezkel on the way to see where the water is flowing, and he has a measuring stick in his hand. Vayamod elef ba'ama vaya'avireni b'mayim mea fasim. He measures 1,000 cubits, and he takes me in this water, which is ankle water, which means ad korsule. The water is now deep until his ankles, because as it continues to flow, it becomes larger and larger, the water. Vayomed elef vayavireni b'mayim mei birkayim, which means ad birkei. Then he measures another 1,000 amas, this angel, and takes me to the water, and it is knee water, which means that the water goes up to his knees. Vayomed elef vayavireni mei mosnayim ad mosnaya. Then he measures another 1,000 amas, and the angel takes me in the water, and the water goes up to my loins. Mikan va'elach vayomed elef nachal asher lo uchal la'avor afilu lebironim gedola ein yochol la'avor bo. The pasuk then says that the angel takes me another 1,000 amas, and he brings me to a river that I cannot go into. And the Brisa just elaborates and says that not only can I not go into the water, but even a large ship cannot make its way through this very, very torrential water. My time of etzi adir lo ya'avirenu that it says in the pasuk that even a very strong body will not be able to pass through it. And why is that? Mipnei ma ki geyu hamayim ki shachu, because the water is so powerful and so strong because it's very wavy. Ki shachu means that what's that?
Like rapids.
Like rapids. Mahu mishachu milashut. It means that, or misachu, it could also be read, I think, is it sachu or shachu? I don't... yes, sachu. Let's see. Yeah, it says... let's say Saishkar... yeah. Okay, meisachu, sorry. That it's water that does not allow me to swim in it. Mahu meisachu milashut. It does not allow me to swim in it or to float in it. Amar Rav Chuna ba'asrin kori l'shaita shchona, that in or schona, that in our land we call swimming the word sachona, which is another term for swimming. Uperas yadav bikirbo ka'asher yifros hasocha lischos, as it says in the book of Eov, that he shall spread his hands amidst himself like a swimmer shall spread his hands. Meaning that this is the word soche, is the word to swim. Mahu lischot, and what does it mean to swim? Amar Rabbi Yossi be Rabbi Bon, mayan de mismalalan ba'alma. When a swimmer spreads his arms, he does so in order to demonstrate, not only does he do it in order to move, but it almost looks like he's gesturing. He's gesturing in order to show how massive the water is. And so, I guess that's the reason why it's called lischot, from the word sicha, because when you gesture your arms in swimming, it's almost like you're speaking, like having a conversation, like a person who speaks and moves his hands when he's speaking. So, ksiv bayom hahu yihiyeh makor niftach lebeis David u'liyoshev Yerushalayim lachatas v'lanida. Now we continue with the passage in Yechezkel. It says, on that day there will be a body of water that shall be opened for the house of David and for the dwellers of Yerushalayim, for chatos and for nida, for purification of these two things. Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachman b'shem Rabbi Yonasan mibeis David v'ad Yoshev Yerushalayim kesherim lenida u'lechatos mikan va'elach ki taru v'seim kesherim lenida u'psum l'meichatos. So he explains as follows, that the water will be like wellspring water when it comes from the Holy of Holies and emanates out throughout Yerushalayim. And therefore, because it's wellspring water, it's kosher for preparing, using that water for preparation of the ashes of the red heifer, and it's also kosher for a nida to immerse herself in that water. However, from that point onwards, the water accumulates rainwater and other naturally occurring waters, and therefore it may be kosher as a mikvah for a nida, but it's not kosher for preparing the ashes of the para aduma, because you need only a pure wellspring water, and this is no longer wellspring water, it's a combination of wellspring water and other waters as well. Amar Rabbi Lazar mi beis David v'ad Yoshvi Yerushalayim kisherim lenida ulechatos mikan va'elach mekatav riso saying psula lenida ulechatos. He explains that no, once it gets out of Yerushalayim, it's not even kosher for a nida anymore, and the way that, one of the ways the Korban Ha'ida learns is that because the water will be sloping up and down mountains, it'll be on such a rapid flow that it won't be usable for a nida mikvah, because a mikvah has to be collected water, and this will be too fast flowing for even a woman to immerse herself in. Kisiv vayomer elai hamayim ha'ela yotzim el hagalila hakadmona. So God says to Yechezkel, he says, these waters that are emanating towards the Galilee, hakadmona, the ancient Galilee, ze yam shel samcho. This refers to the samcho. Someone told me that it's the Chula swamp, the Achula swamp. So I had a couple of Israelis that were familiar with that region in the Galilee. There's a swamp there that was drained in the 50s, and now they're trying to replenish it. That's what they were explaining to me. I didn't even know about this swamp. Anyway, so that's what that water.
South of the Kinneret.
North of the Kinneret. So the water will flow into that. The Yardu el Ha'arava zeyam shel Tver. Then it will flow into the plain that also is going northward, but not as far north. It's going to the Kinneret, to Tiberias Sea is what it's called. Ubo hayama, then the water will flow to the Yam, Zeyam hamelach. That's referring to the Dead Sea. El hayama hamotziim, then it'll flow to the Yama hamotziim, Zeyam hagadol. That's the great ocean, meaning the Mediterranean Sea. V'lama nikra shemo motzeim. Why is it called motzeim? That it is found there, or that it is prevalent. Kineged shtei pa'amim sheyatza. Or motzeim also means that it's the time of the water spreading out, because there were 2 times in history that this water created a mass flood of the entire Mediterranean area. Sheyatza echad b'dor enosh ve'echad b'dor haflaga. Once in the generation of Enosh, which Rashi tells us there was a big flood in the generation of Enosh. On the pasuk Azhu Chal Likro B'Shem Hashem, I think Rashi says it over there, that wiped out 1/3 of the population of the Middle East. And the other time there was a flood was in the times of the Dor Haflaga. I'm not familiar with this. I have to tell you, I don't remember ever seeing this before, that there was a flood during the generation of the Tower of Babel. And I don't understand where Chazal get this from, because I haven't seen it anywhere else. But if anyone wants to do, Rabbi Berman, if you want to do some research and let me know where you can find this, that there was a flood during the Dor HaFlaga, please let me know. Rabbi Elazar b'shem Rabbi Chanina barishona yatsa ad Kalbaria uvashnia yatsa ad Kipe Barbaria. That the first flood from the Mediterranean went up to Kalbarios, or Kalbarios. Some told me it's in Italy. And the second time the flood went all the way up to the Barbary coast, which is somewhere in northern Africa. Yeah. Rabbi Acha b'shem Rabbi Chanina barishona yatsa ad Kipe Barbaria ubashne yatsa ad Akko ad Yafo. He says no. The first time the water flowed all the way to the Barbary coast, but the second time it only went to Akko and to Yafo. And he brings it from a pasuk. That this pasuk is in Eov. It says, "Ad po tavo velo sosif, ad Akko tavo velo sosif." That only until Akko shall you come, and you shall not go further. Upo yashis begaon galecha, and here you shall stop their mighty waves. Ad Yafo ashis gaon galecha, which you read until Jaffa shall your waves reach. So naicha yama rabba v'yama demilcha. Or rather, Nicha Yama Rabba B'Yama Demilcha B'Shvil Miskan Yama. So the Gemara now says the water would flow from the Kodesh HaKadoshim into the Mediterranean and into the Dead Sea in order to sweeten the waters, because those are salt water bodies of water, and in order to sweeten it and make it fresh water, you'll have this tributary going from the Kodesh HaKadoshim flowing miraculously into those bodies of water and sweetening the water. But the Tiberia Yama, but rather Yama de Tiberia and Yama de Samchu l'Rabos digasam. But the purpose of the water flowing into the Kinneret and into the Samcho swamp, those are freshwater bodies of water. So the purpose of these waters going in is to increase the fish supply in those oceans, to make them more fruitful with fish. Dichsiv be lemina tihiyad digasam, as the pasuk says, according to their species shall be their fish, meaning there'll be an increase of species of fish. Lemine minim tihiyad digasam, there'll be a tremendous increase in the number of fish. Tani Amar Reb Shimon excuse me. Ma'aseh shehalachti l'tzaydon ve'vi l'fana yosem mishlosh meyos mine dagim b'tamchoy echad. The Bryce is just illustrating that sometimes a body of water can be abundant with multiple species of fish. I once went to Tzidon and they brought out to me on one tray 300 different kinds of fish. So you see that such a thing is possible. Then the pasuk says, "V'nirpa'u hamayim ebitzeisav v'gaba'av v'lo yirpa'u l'melach nitnu." So the pasuk is a very cryptic passage. It says the water will be healing water when it goes out and it overflows, but then it says it won't heal and it'll become salty. So how can both things be true? How can you tell me that the water will be cured of its saltiness, and then in the same breath say the water will not be cured? So the answer is, says the Gemara, Makam hu shmo v'lo yirpa'u. Answer is that the water, what the pasuk is conveying is that the water will flow to many, many different places in Eretz Yisrael, but the one place that it won't go is a place called v'lo yirpa'u. It shall not be healed. But the water itself will be curative to every other area of Eretz Yisrael, both dry land and water. The pasuk then says that along this river that is flowing the river banks will be growing beautiful trees that are growing fruit. Its leaves will not wither, and its fruit will never cease in its months. Now, what does it mean, in its months? So, Tani, Amar Reb Yehuda, Lefisha Ba'olam Hazet, Tavua Osa L'Shisha Chadasham, V'ilan Osa L'Shnei Masar Chodesh, Aval La'asi Lavo Hatvua Osa L'Chodesh Echad, V'ilan Osa L'Shnei Chadashim, My time L'Chadashav Yevaker. L'Chadashav, according to him, means in its months, which means months is a minimum of 2. And what you see from here is that it'll take 2 months for something that a tree normally, for it to mature, to be able to grow fruit, needs at least a year. So this is going to be a miracle, that normally something that takes a year will be able to grow in 2 months. And that means that something that normally takes 6 months to grow, using the same kind of ratio, will be able to grow in 1 month. And therefore we see from this pasuk that in the future world, you'll plant grain, and instead of needing to take 6 months for the grain to grow and to be harvestable, you'll be able to, that'll only take a month. So Amar Reb Yossi Lefisha Ba'olam Hazeh HaTzevua Osa L'Shisha Chadasham V'ilan Osa L'Yudbeis Chodesh Aval La'asi Lavo HaTzevua Osa L'Tesvav Yom V'ilan Osa L'Chodesh Echad. He says no, there'll be an even greater miracle. In the future world, instead of grain growing in 6 months, it'll grow in 15 days. And instead of a tree maturing to produce fruit in a year, it'll produce fruit in 1 month. And how do I know that? Shekein matzinu she'asa satzavua b'mei Yoel lachamisha asar yom v'kariv mimena ha'omer. Because we find in the times of Yoel the prophet that grain grew miraculously in just 15 days, to the point where the barley was harvestable. It was planted on the 1st of Nisan, and they could harvest it on the 16th in order to bring the Korban HaOmer. My time, where do you see this in the pasuk? It says, "Uvenei Tzion gilu v'simchu b'Hashem Elokeichem, ki nasan lachem es hamoreh litzdaka v'yorad lachem geshem moreh u'malkosh barishon." It says that God will bless you by causing your rains, all of your rains, to fall on the 1st. And he's reading the 1st to mean on the 1st of the month, of the 1st month, which is the 1st of Nisan. Uma mekayim Reb Yossi l'chadashav yevaker, b'chol chodesh v'chodesh yeh mevaker. So what does he do with the words l'chadashav yevaker, which implies that it takes 2 months for a tree to mature? He'll tell you that it does. The word l'chadashav does not mean months, 2 months. It means each month. Each month, the tree will grow again and replenish and grow new fruit. Ve'alehu litrufa, its leaves shall be for curative purposes. Rabbi Yochanan Omar terafeha meitzitza leha v'teref mizona. Rabbi Yochanan Omar terafeha meitzitza leha. According to the Korban Eda, what that means is that the fruit will grow while the leaves are still on it. Meaning, normally you have to wait for the tree to grow leaves and then to flower, and then the fruit grows. These trees will be precocious and they'll produce fruit immediately. The teref mizona, and then the pasuk says that its food will be as provision. What does it mean as provision? Rav Shmuel chad omer lahatir peh shalamalan v'chad omer lahatir peh shalamatan. The machlokus is, how will this food be curative in some way? So one opinion is that it'll be curative of the mouth, which means, as we'll see in just a minute, that if a person was unable to speak, he'll take a bite out of this fruit, and he'll have a new way of speaking, a new speech. If he was mute, he'll be able to speak. The other opinion is it'll be curative to the mouth of below, which is a euphemism for a woman's private parts, meaning that if she was barren before, her womb will be blessed, it will be fruitful, and she'll be able to bear children. Rabbi Chanina of Rabbi Yosha ben Levi, in the same vein, Chad Omer lahatir pe akaros, v'chad Omer lahatir pe ilumim. One says it'll be able to open up the mouth of a barren woman, and the other one says it'll be able to open up the mouth of the mute. Ulu'umasan bat safon. So that concludes our discussion of the passage in Yecheskel chapter 47, and the whole reason why we brought this was to explain that gate, the Shar Hamayim, the water gate. The reason why, according to one opinion, it's called the water gate is because of this vision that Yecheskel has of the water emanating from the temple. Now we go on and continue our discussion in the Mishnah. On the north side, we had one of the gates was the Shar Yechanya. Now, someone had mentioned before that, isn't it Yehoyachin? The answer is Yehoyachin and Yechanya are one and the same. Sometimes he's called Yechanya, and sometimes he's called Yehoyachin. And by the way, he was the son of Yehoyakim. He was originally put into place by Nebuchadnezzar. thinking that he would become a vassal of Babylon, Yehoiachin or Yechanya decided to rebel, and he said, no, we're going to try to make this work. We're not going to just, toe the party line. And so Nebuchadnezzar ousted him, and he replaced him with Tzidkiyahu, his uncle. Now that's what we learned about yesterday. So at Motzei b'shah shalu Nebuchadnezzar lakan ba v'yashav lo b'dofnei shel Antuchya v'yatza Sanhedrin gadola likrasa. We find that when Nebuchadnezzar came to besiege Israel, he sat at the edge of Antioch, which was a city that was occupied by the Babylonians. Antioch, California. Yeah, I'm sure there's a bunch of Antiochs around the country. It's a biblical city. Yeah, the Sanhedrin comes out to greet him, and va'amar lo higiyaz man habayis azeli charev. The Sanhedrin themselves acknowledged, now's the time for the Churban. We realize the time of the Churban has arrived, which is a shocking statement. But they themselves understood that it's gatenished. It's not worth it anymore. It's time for and this is why Yechanya could not succeed any longer, because once the Sanhedrin realized that it was time for the Churban, then no king could ever possibly succeed. So Amar Lahen, Osur Shehimlachti Aleichem Tenuhu Li, Va'ani Holech. So he said, so fine. So give me the king that I placed over you to be my vassal, and he's not cooperating. Give him to me, and I'll take him away. Bo va'amru lo Yehoiachin melech Yehuda Nebuchadnezzar bo ilach. So he told Yehoiachin, the king wants you. And the Sanhedrin was more than willing to give him up. So once he realized that, so Kevin Sheshama mehen kach, nato maftecho shel beis hamikdash, ala lagago shel heichal. He takes the keys to the temple. I mean, just imagine this image. Takes the keys to the temple and climbs up to the rooftop of the temple. Amar lefanav ribono shel olam l'sha'avar hayinu ne'emanim lach v'hayu maftechosecha misurin lanu. Previously, in previous history, we were faithful to you. You could trust us, and therefore you gave us the keys to your house. But achshav she'enanu ne'emanim harei maftechosecha misurin lach. But now that you can no longer trust us, we're giving you back the keys. Train Amoroim. There's two Amoros. Chad Omar Zarkan Va'od Lo Yardu. So one opinion is he threw the keys up in the air, and they never fell down. V'chad Omar Ba'a Kimin Yad V'nat Lasin Miyada. Another opinion is like a sort of a hand came down from heaven and took the keys from him. Kaven Shara'u Kol Chore Yehuda Cain. When the free men of Judah saw this, Alu L'Rosh Gagosein V'naflu V'mesu. Many of them climbed up to their rooftops, realizing that the time of the Churban was near, and they threw themselves off their roofs. Hadahu Dirsiv, Masa Gechi Zayon, Malacha Efo, Ki Alisa Kulach Legagos, Tishuos Meleah Hir Homiyah. That this is the vision of that everyone's going up to the rooftops, and there's a great cry and a great tragedy that people are throwing themselves off the roofs. Let's go through the rest quickly. The next Mishnah says, Yud Gimel Shulchanos Hayu B'Mikdash. There were now 13 tables that were in the temple. Ches Shel Shayish B'Veis HaMitbachayim. 8 were made out of marble that were in the Beis Mitbachayim, which is the place in the courtyard where they would, after the Shechita, they would dismember and flay the animal. Shalei and Madichin Asakarim, they would also wash out the intestines so that there would be no excrement there. Ubeis b'mayrav, and there were 2 tables in the west. B'mayrav hakevesh, to the west of the ramp. It was behind the ramp, which is where preparing the limbs to be brought up to the altar. Echad shel shayish v'echad shel kesef. One was made of silver and one was made of marble. Al shel shayish nosen es ha'ivarim. On the marble table, you had to put the limbs, and we'll learn why silver is not good for anything that is moist or warm. Al shel kesef klei sharis, and on the silver table you put the ministering vessels that were going to be used for that day. Ubeis boom. There were another 2 tables in the ulam, which is the antechamber to the heichal. If you remember, the covered part of the temple was in the shape of a letter T, so the ulam was the wide top of the T. This is where the antechamber you'd walk into. Right outside there, mibifnim al pesach habayis, that they were right out, and right there by the doorway to the heichal in the antechamber were positioned 2 tables. Echad shel shayish ve'echad shel zahav. One was of marble and one was of gold. Al shel shayish nosen lechem haponim b'chen isaso ve'al shel zahav b'yitziaso. when the newly baked bread was being brought in, they would first leave it for a moment on the marble table as they were preparing to carry it in, and the old bread would be placed on a golden table on the way out. And the reason why you needed to use a gold table for the ones on the way out is shemalin b'kodesh v'lo moridim, is because since they had been resting all week on a golden table, you can't demote their status by putting them on a table of any other material other than gold. You always ascend in holiness, you never descend. Echad shel zahav mibifnim sh'alav lechem haponim tamid. And the final table, the 13th table, was the famous shulchan of the lechem haponim. That is discussed in the Torah. That's where the bread rested for the entire week. Take a look at the Gemara. Tani al shel kesef. That there's a brisa that says that the showbread, there were two tables at the entrance of the heichal where the showbread table was placed. One was made of silver and one was made of gold. Not like our Mishnah, which says that one was marble and one was gold. So Rabbi Yossi b'shem Rabbi Shmuel bar Rabbi Yitzchak Rabbi Chananya Mati ba b'shem Rabbi Yochanan les kan shel kesef mipnei shuhu marsiach. He says, no, the Bryce is incorrect. Our Mishnah is correct because it had to be made out of marble, because if you have freshly baked bread that is warm, to put it on silver could cause the bread to really corrode and go bad, because silver has that quality that if you put something warm and moist on it, it could cause it to rot, to begin to go bad. But the Gemara says, but why should you be worried about that? Lo kein tani zeh echad min hanisim shenasu bebeis hamikdash shekashem shayu manichem oso chom kach hayu motzin oso chom. What do you have to worry? There was a miracle that happened weekly with the showbread, that it was just as warm and fresh when you took it off after a week as it was when you put it on. So why would you have to worry by putting it on silver tables? The Gemara answers, Shnemar lasum lechem cham bayom ilagcho, as the pasuk says that the bread was just as fresh and warm when it was taken off. So Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi Omar, ein maskirin maaseh nisin. The answer is, just like we would say in the Bavli, ein somchin ala nes. You don't rely on miracles if you know that the chemical properties of silver are to cause bread to go bad. You don't rely on a miracle lichatchila to do that. Next, Bon Kume Rebbe Ila, Lo Hayasham Lechem, Ahulanichel L'Shabbos Haba. The question in general is about the Lechem Haponim. Let's say, for whatever reason, there was no freshly baked bread. You're supposed to bake the bread every Friday. Let's say the Romans prevented us from baking bread. Should we leave the old Lechem Haponim that was baked the previous week and let it continue staying on the shulchan? Or no, should we just take it off? Amar lon kasiv and asatalo shulchan lechem ponim l'fnei tomid lechem ponim afilu pasel. So he said to them, you know what the halacha is? There has to be bread, just like there's a ner tamid, there has to be lechem hatamid. There has to be constant bread, even if it's pasel because it's already past its expiration date. It still has to remain on the shulchan. So if there, for whatever reason, there's not bread available that's the new bread, you leave the old bread on until you replace it with new bread. Asar shulchanos asa shlomo d'chsiv haya shulchanos asara vayonach beheichal. There were 10 tables that Shlomo HaMelech made for the showbread. As the pasuk said, he says he made 10 tables. He placed them in the heichal, chamisha miyamin v'chamisha mismol, 5 on the right and 5 on the left. So the Gemara says, I don't understand. In Tamar chamisha b'darom v'chamisha b'tzafon v'halo ein hashulchan kasher ela b'tzafon. You can't tell me that 5, when it says right and left, meaning that you're looking in from the east, looking westward, which is the way you look into the temple. If you're looking into the heichal that way, so the right means on the north side, and on the left means on the south side. But you're not allowed to have the shulchan on the south side. The menorah was on the south side, and the shulchan was always on the north side. Shenamar v'sashulchan titen al tzelat safon, as it says that the shulchan must always be in the north. So matam alomar chamisha mim v'chamisha mismol. So what does it mean 5 on the right and 5 on the left? Well, rather it means ela chamisha miyamin shulchano shel Moshe v'chamisha mismolo. All the tables were in the north side, but they were all adjacent to the large table that Moshe Rabbeinu had made, and Shlomo built an additional 10 tables, 5 to the right and 5 to the left of the Moshe's shulchan in the north. And even though he made 10 additional tables, he would only put the lechem haponim on Moshe's shulchan. The other 10 were ornamental accoutrements to the main table. Shenamar es hashulchan asher olav lechem haponim. As the pasuk says, the table that he saw, that asher olav, that was upon it, in the singular, the showbread. Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda Omer, no, he disagrees. He says, Al kulan hayamasader. He put showbread on all of the tables, even the ones that he had, the 10 that he had added. Shenamar es hashulchanos v'aleihem lechem haponim. The tables and upon them was the shobet. You have two psukim which seem to contradict each other. The Gemara doesn't resolve the contradiction. It just tells you there are two opinions whether the bread was on those tables or only on the table that Moshe had made. And with this we conclude. Have a wonderful day and a guten chodesh.